about everything that I read in July. I read a good stack of books. Most of them I very much enjoyed. Now, of course, we always start with the vial because these are books that, are just not books that really resonated with me. They might resonate with you, and if they do, that is wonderful. I really do believe that some books are for some people and not for others, and there's something quite beautiful about that. There's a reader out there for every book. So I have two books that I want to share with you for this section. The first book is called Foolproof. This is a book about misinformation and disinformation. It is nonfiction, and it truly is to explain to the reader what those things are, what the difference between misinformation and disinformation, and how stories and hoaxes and just misinformation can get around, and how people can end up believing in these things. I'm reading it because I've got myself into a little bit of a tricky situation at work, where there is someone at work who keeps talking to me about stuff related to misinformation, and I'm trying to learn how to speak to them kindly about it because they're a good person. It's very awkward. And the reason that this book is probably in the vile category is because I don't have an answer. The answer is essentially for people that you think are at risk of believing misinformation and disinformation. You should essentially warn them that this thing is out there. There's this rumor out there and you might hear of it. But what about those people that are like fully entrenched already? There was not an answer to that. So I do have a better understanding of what misinformation and disinformation is, but not a solution, and that's a bit scary. I also found that this book really spoke to the work that this author has done with different universities. He created a lot of like online quizzes to get people to be able to recognize phrases, news articles, that kind of thing of what is disinformation and misinformation. And there was a lot of talk about just results, and I found it very frustrating and a bit boring. So it's interesting in some ways and not helpful in other ways. And that's why it's in the vile category. Another book I put in the vile category is The Drift by C.J. Tudor. This is a story about various groups of people that end up in precarious situations. One of them, one group of people are in a bus that is broken down. They have nowhere to go. It's snowy out. One of the groups are in like a ski lift kind of thing, and the other are in a cabin, and there is essentially like the zombie apocalypse has happened. And I think going into this, I thought it was going to be a thriller, and it's much more horror, and I didn't really enjoy it, if I'm being honest. There were so many characters in each of these situations. It was hard to tell who was who. It might not have helped that I listened to this on audio. So maybe if you are going to pick this one up, read the physical form so you don't get slightly confused by who is who and what is happening in what situation. In terms of the Tolerable now, I've got a couple of physical books that I can show you. The first is Distress Signals by Catherine Ryan Howard. This is about a man who's, I was going to call her his wife, but it's his girlfriend. Adam's girlfriend is going on a trip for work. She is essentially going on a business trip to Barcelona, and she's getting on a boat, a ship, and she promptly disappears. Now, it suggests that she got off the boat somewhere, I think in Nice or something along those lines, but that doesn't make sense to him whatsoever. She was supposed to come home. There was no indication that she was leaving him. And he gets her passport in the mail one day, and with it, it says, "I'm sorry, S." And so he starts going down the rabbit hole. The police really aren't helping him. And so he's trying to find out, has this happened to other people? This is very strange. And he does find out that a woman on a boat called the Celebrate also disappeared. And he goes down the rabbit hole trying to find his girlfriend in the hopes of finding her. I will say that I did like Adam a lot. I believe the complications of this relationship. I really did enjoy quite a bit of this. It just felt long to me. I liked the other storylines as well. All of that was good. It felt long and it was not thrillery enough to me. It felt more like a mystery than anything else. And a light mystery at that. And for Catherine Ryan Howard, like, she can write some gritty stuff. She can write things that are like quite scary in many ways. And this had a little bit of that, but not quite enough for me. Another book in the Tolerable section is The Collected Regrets of Clover. And I think this is probably my most disappointing read of the year. This follows a woman who is a death doula. She witnessed the death of her kindergarten teacher, actually, firsthand when she was young, and it really impacted her. And she, in subsequent years, decided to become a death doula, to be there by people's side as they died. And she is a very lonely person. She doesn't have friends. She doesn't really put herself out there. And she's suffering because of that. She's quite comfortable in her life. She probably wouldn't consider herself suffering, but she is suffering because of that. She doesn't have connection and community the way that she should. And she's so very much trying to create that for these people who are dying, but she doesn't give it to herself. So this follows her meeting a woman who is on her deathbed, who explains a romantic relationship that she had when she was younger. And our main character, Clover, goes on the hunt to see if she can find this man that this dying woman once loved. And that takes her on a journey. I will say there was way too much romance in this book for me. I found it quite annoying. As you guys know, it drives me nuts. There was just way too much of that. It was nice to see her coming out of her comfort zone and all of that, but I went into this book expecting Eleanor Oliphant's Completely Fine vibes, because it had that kind of vibes, and this had similarities, but Eleanor Oliphant had layers to it. She was an onion that you were unpeeling, and I did not feel that way with Clover. She just kind of opened herself up a little bit more to people, made friends with people, and that was kind of it. Slightly disappointing, I have to say. Moving on to the Splendid, we have Summer Water here by Sarah Moss, I think her name is. I really enjoyed this book. Very atmospheric. This follows several people who stay in the same kind of summer camp town over the summer break. They are all interconnected. When an event happens only at the end of the book, it's quite a tragic event, but you see the lead up to that event from various different people's perspectives. Now here's an example of various perspectives, and it was fairly easy to be able to distinguish between everyone, because you never really went back to anyone. So you would meet a mom who has children and is just really burnt out. You'd meet a teenager who has no interest in staying at this cabin for the summer and just wants to be with his friends. You met all sorts of people and how they all intertwined at the very end. It's a super hot day, very rainy day. There's a major storm coming through the area, and it just it felt like you were there. It was really, really fantastic writing. And I feel like she really got into the characters' heads, and she was able to write from a teenage boy's perspective just as well as she was able to write from a young mother's perspective. And I thought that was really, really well done. Next up is a book called Truth Telling by Michelle Good. This was incredible. She's a Canadian Indigenous writer, and this is nonfiction about the difficulties that Indigenous people face living in Canada. A lot of people can have the perception that Canada is very friendly and nice and safe and all of those things. And to a certain extent, that's true, but we have horrific racism that lives and exists still in Canada. Indigenous people were subject to government and church genocide, essentially. Actually, she really made me realize really what that word means. And there was the government had like I don't know if it was an act, but it was essentially the aim was to kill the Indian within children, and they created schools, residential schools, where they sent Indigenous kids. Many of them did not survive, and we are finding grave sites all over Canada of children that did not survive them, and they would strip their culture from them. It was horrific, and that is just one aspect of this book that they speak to. She also speaks to all of the Indigenous women that are being murdered, and no one is looking into their deaths. There is currently a landfill that they believe at least 3 women's remains are at. They were murdered, and they refused to search the landfill. There's so many horrific tragedies that Indigenous people have faced and still face in Canada. And Michelle Good dives into that and speaks to truth telling. And I loved it. And I listened to this on audio, and I want to listen to it again because it was so chock full of information. I should honestly just buy the book in physical form. I don't remember everything, and yet I felt like the whole time I was listening to it, I was going, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, or it just affirmed certain things for me, and I just absolutely loved it. It was very, this nearly ended up being my favorite. It might be my favorite. I think it actually is my favorite. Okay, so we're not going to have a favorite category. This truly was my favorite because it was the most impactful book that I read. We're going to still go through the rest of the books though. Next up is The Family Firm. This is another nonfiction book by Emily Oster. I have read all of her books now, and she essentially is an economist, and she looks at studies from the perspective of an economist, where she's making sure that the statistics are right, that the numbers line up, and she helps you uncover like what's a good study and what's not a good study. The Family Firm relates to kids that are school age. Nora is going into school this September, which is wild. And this kind of speaks to, should you go private school or public school? She's going public school. But anyway, and it speaks to school, it speaks to all sorts of things, how you should set your family up kind of like a business and decide like what works for your family. There's the potential for your family to become insanely busy at this age, like between essentially in elementary school. There really is that potential, and does that work for your family or not? And it was really interesting for me to kind of reflect what would work for our family. So I really did enjoy that book quite a lot. I trust her very, very much. Next is Our Wives Under the Sea. This was a very strange book. This follows a woman whose wife is someone who goes on submarines and goes to the depth of the ocean and does studies on what they find. Now, her adventure, I don't know, lasts way longer than expected. They end up down there 6 months later, and you follow her perspective when her wife suddenly does come back. Like she nearly gave up and thought they were lost for good. Her wife does reappear, but her wife reappears very, very differently. Like she's doing things like spending a lot of time in the bathroom in water. She's not really responsive, not really having conversations. There's so many things. It's very impactful, and almost, I don't know if this is supposed to be, I imagine it's supposed to be essentially the telling of what it's like to watch a loved one go through dementia or Alzheimer's. It really felt like it could be an analogy for that. We also follow the woman who actually goes diving, and you find out what happens on the dive with the other people that she is diving with, which is really strange as well. It was such a strange book, but gripping. I did read this when the oceanic submarine vanished and they were looking for them. That was also a strange thing that occurred that took over, I feel like, everyone's lives. Anyway, I kind of read that simultaneously. Very interesting. Next, I also read The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. I never thought I was going to pick up another Kristen Hanna, and then I did, and I liked it. This takes place in the 1930s during the Depression and also the Dust Bowl. So we follow a woman who was actually raised quite wealthy and is truly abused by her family. Her family is not kind to her. She does get pregnant. They abandon her, and she goes to live with a family and starts a family of her own. And she's suddenly a farmer, and then the Dust Bowl happens and the crops all die and everyone is famished, and the dust is just everywhere. This felt very atmospheric and I really enjoyed that. I will say the characters feel super one-layered, and that's what I don't like about Kristen Hanna's books. It's more as writing that's story-based, which I appreciate. But the characters feel one-layered, and this is who they are, and that's it. And that's okay, but it's not going to end up being my favorite, you know. And last but not least, oh gosh, Riley Sager is back, guys. I'm so happy to say. I read The Only One Left. This is a book about a nurse, essentially, who takes care of patients, and she is tasked to take care of a woman named Leonora Hope. I forget her name. Lenora Hope. Sorry about that. Now, Lenora Hope is famous because people believe that she murdered her entire family in the 1920s. Now, we meet her in the 80s. She is very old, very, very old. She's kind of on the brink of dying. She's, I believe, had a stroke and can only use one hand. But she decides, Lenora decides, that she is going to communicate with her new nurse and tell her everything that happened that fateful night that her entire family died. This was gripping, twisty, turny. I really enjoyed it. Super gothic and atmospheric. We have a house teetering on the edge of a cliff, and the house is not stable, and you feel like it's going to fall any second. I loved how atmospheric this was. Really thoroughly enjoyed that. Oh, I do have one more left. The last book is called Outlive. I actually have it downstairs, but I am too lazy to go downstairs, and Peter Attia would be angry with me. So Outlive is a book written by this doctor who I think specifically studied cancer. Now he has a podcast. I think he's still a doctor. He has a podcast that's quite famous called The Drive, and then he's got this book that has like rave reviews, and I also think it's incredible. And he speaks to, what do you want the last decade of your life to look like? Because how you live your life can very much determine what the last decade of your life is going to look like. Do you want to be able to pick up grandchildren? Do you want to be able to go grocery shopping and carry grocery bags? Do you want to live on your own? All of these things. And so he has several recommendations based on the things that kill people the most, which are cardiovascular disease, diabetes, as well as cancer. And he gives specific things that you can do to combat these things. He has so much information about things like screening for cancer. He believes that screening should be done much more regularly and kind of stacked screening. So like today I just went and got a mammogram because of him. And I should be stacking that with another kind of ultrasound so that they can truly see what is going on in my breast. So fascinating. I feel like I've been very passive about my health for a very long time now. He speaks to the importance of exercise, which was like music to my ears. Not. What type of exercise you should do, and actually how exercise can truly help you live a better life, which totally makes sense. It makes sense. I don't want to do it, but anyway, it is very it's chock full of information. I feel a little bit overwhelmed and like I am so far behind in what I should be doing for my body, and how, yeah, I just feel really overwhelmed at the moment, having, you know, just ingested all of this information, and I'm doing all of the wrong things in my life. So anywho, loved that as well. And those are all of the books that I read in July. Let me know in the comments below, what was your favorite book of July? I would love to know, and I will talk with you very soon. Goodbye.